Hello and welcome to Live with Andrew, our first live math class. This math class was given live on the 7th of April, and I'm recording it today to put on our YouTube page, and that's where you will be seeing this. This was recorded live, so the questions that, well, it was intended to be recorded live, so I'm going to still kind of deliver it in the same way that I did on that. As we go through this today, I want you to know that hopefully you aren't too bored, and that's why we have the wooden background there, because a lot of folks are getting a little bit bored, and I just hope that your families are safe during the COVID-19 crisis. We understand it is a different time that we find ourselves, and we know that it's just kind of an odd time that we are. But hopefully you're not too bored, and this should give you something that you can work on while you're doing our class. First and foremost, just know all the programs that you have access to in class, you have access to online at home. If you need login information for any of that kind of stuff, whether it's HiSET, GD Academy, our KET Fast Forward program, the WorkKeys program, please contact us. We will be more than glad to get you that information. You can contact your teacher through the Remind app if that's how you talk to them, or you can email adult.education@rcsd.ms, and I will be glad to give you your login information. We can help you. We can set up individual Zoom times and different things that we can do to just help you to be able to be successful working from home. Again, if you have any questions, if there's problems you have or any of that, don't hesitate to contact us. We're here to help. As we go through this today, I want to make sure that you understand how important the fluency of doing everything is. And one of the great resources for that is Khan Academy. We have a class through Khan Academy, and there's our class code there at the bottom, and it isn't a hot link there on your screen. But if you just go to Khan Academy and join, it'll ask if you have a class code. If you do, you just put in CN9VDU. That connects you to our class. You can go in there and work. Again, if you have questions, please ask. I'll be more than glad to help you with any of that stuff that I can there. We want to make sure that you're accessing programs, but then you're not just working, you're also getting any of the assistance and help that you need. And if we can do that and be of assistance in any way, we want to be able to do that for you. So Khan Academy, there's our class. We also have Smart Start. If you're interested in being in our Smart Start program, that's something that you can work on individually. It's a Canvas class that you'll go through and work on. If you're interested in that, please come see us. We'll be more than glad to sign you up into that. And it's something you can start, work on, and go from there. If you have any questions, contact your teacher or email adult.education@rcsd.ms. Now we will get started on math. The basic operations that we're going to be looking at today, and the main part of all this, is adding, subtracting, multiplying, and dividing. Those are the basic operations you're going to use in really everything that you do on the test. We want to make sure that you're able to build your skills in these areas. And I know what most people think: I have a calculator, why do I need to bother? But it's important that you understand there's a lot of this you need to know even though you get to use a calculator. We cannot stress enough the importance of knowing these basic operations. Building your fluency on these operations is going to be what makes you successful on the test. The same way, if I speak a little bit of Spanish, okay, I can speak un poco español, okay, I know just a little bit. I'm not very fluent in Spanish. I wouldn't be able to have a conversation. Now, I could answer the phone and answer some questions about classes, or they might want to talk to the teacher and I can tell them to call back tomorrow or something like that, but I'm not fluent in Spanish. If they tried to talk to me about anything else in a subject that I'm not familiar, I wouldn't know where to begin with that. It's the same way with math operations. We might know how to do one or two little parts of it, but you need to build fluency so no matter what you're thrown at in math, you're able to be successful. As it says there on the bottom of the screen, if you aren't fluent in these operations, it's going to be your downfall. It's what I call a time killer on the test. So many students come through and they say, after they tested, they miss it by 1-2 points, and they go, "Oh, I just didn't have time to get to those last couple of problems, so I had to guess." Well, because you're not fluent and you're having to stop and think about how to do some of those basic operations, even if it's stopping to put it in on the calculator, you're taking time that you're not able to spend on what you're working on. I use the example all the time as if you're cooking a meal. If I'm cooking a meal, I have all my ingredients ready. I'm getting it started. I'm heating things up. I'm getting things going. I'm measuring out. Well, then all of a sudden I realize I'm missing an ingredient, and it's a key ingredient. I can't continue without that ingredient. I have to stop everything and go get that ingredient. Now, if I'm having to stop and go to Kroger and go get a new ingredient or get whatever it is, that's going to take a long time. It's going to stop all my momentum on what I'm doing. And that's the same thing on a test. If you're using your head to problem solve and you're trying to figure out what's going on, well, then all of a sudden you have to stop everything, drop everything, and do a basic operation. Then you come back and you're not even sure where to begin. You're not sure how to get back to what you're trying to do. And a lot of times people just say, you know what, forget it. I'm not going to be able to do this. And it's important on the test to build that fluency beforehand so you can spend your time problem solving and figuring out what's there. The test is designed to mess you up. The test is designed to run out of time. And the calculator, you have it for all but six questions on the test, but it's still good to know how to use those quick operations, adding, subtracting, multiplying, dividing. Those are going to be the keys to everything else you do in math. So it's crucial that you know how to do these particular skills. I just can't emphasize that enough today. If you need to build your fluency on that, again, Khan Academy is one of the greatest ways to do that. It lets you work and work and work, and you can do a lot of different problems and set it up in different ways. If you log into there, I tell students to start on 6th grade. It's going to do an initial assessment on you though, and just answer it as truthfully and honestly as possible. It will give you practice on what you need to practice on. And if you think you know it, do your best and it'll say, hey, you did pretty good on this. We might need to work on another part. It's very intuitive and it will kind of design stuff for you as you're going there. But you need to know how to add, subtract, and multiply and divide. So here's some examples. If you're watching this, all you got to do is hit pause and go ahead and solve each one of these questions there. You're just going to go through. There's an addition, long series of addition at the top. There's a subtraction problem, a multiplication problem, and a division problem. So right now, hit pause, work these problems out, and then we will start right back. All right, now that you've had time to do those problems as you're starting back, we are going to work them out and talk about what each one of them are. On the first one that we have, this is addition. It's just adding the numbers up. But if we look at the first one and the bottom one, if you notice there, you add all those up, it equals 135. There were 9 of them, so if we divide that by 9, what we've done there, that's setting up a mean problem or an average problem. And we'll talk about mean, median, and mode in a later lesson. But as you see, this is a very practical application of adding and dividing, why we need to do that. Now, yes, you can punch it in a calculator and get that fairly quickly, but you still have to add up how many there are. There's 9 of them to do the next step and to work that portion out. As we go to the next slide, you can get, yes, 135 divided by 9 was 15. But if you're trying to find the median, which means middle number, as you see on the slide here, median is the middle. In the same way, when you're driving down the road, the median is in between the 2 lanes when you're driving down the interstate, or you're trying to find the mode, which is the most repeated one, the one that shows up the most times, or the range, which is where you subtract the smallest from the biggest. You have to write this out. So a lot of times we do a calculator problem and we just type it in, but then, okay, now I've got to put them in order from smallest to largest to find the median. So I'm going to have to write them out. And if I go ahead when I'm doing these problems and write them out initially, then I'm saving myself some time for later. And that's one of those little time tricks. Looking back on the previous slide, this is how it was written initially: 13, 18, 13, 14, 13, 16, 14, 21, and 13. Okay, those numbers were all there. Well, on this next slide, what I did, I just put them in order. There were 4 13s. Then after the 4 13s, there were 2 14s. Then there was a 16, an 18, and a 21. So as I see those different ones, instantly just writing them down like that, I know, boom, 4 13s, that's going to be my mode. I can see my middle number. There's 9 numbers there. There's 4 on this side, 4 on this side. So my median number is 14. I can do that stuff just by writing them out. Yeah, a calculator will do all this, but you got to put it all in and it takes a while to do it. Or you can just write it out and look at it. And it works pretty quickly there. So as you see this, I looked and I've already told you some of these. The median was 14. It's the one that just shows up the most, or it's the one in the middle when you put them from smallest to largest. Mode is the one that's repeated the most, and that's 13. And then the range, I didn't talk about yet, but that's just where you subtract the smallest number, which is 13, from the largest number, which is 21. And that gives you a range of 8. That's how far that the numbers that we have range. Now, this is data and statistics. This is a question on the test. They will have something along these lines, but you also will have to do this in science or social studies. They'll give you some of these same problems on that part of the test, and you'll need to be able to use that same skill to determine the answers in science and social studies. So this is a good skill that you need to know. Yes, I know you could do it with a calculator, but part of it you're going to be able to just do as you work it out. It's not too terribly hard to do some of these skills by hand. The more you practice it, the easier it'll become. I can do mean, median, and mode problems in no time. Why? Because I practice it. I've done a lot of problems with this. There's a few other skills that you'll get into with this when we get into box and whisker plots and things like that. And that's something that you have to do a little bit more, and you got to write them out. There's just no way around that. All right, so as we move forward, I want you to know I'm not skipping multiplication. Yes, we had to add and divide, and we subtracted doing those problems, but we use multiplication all the time. Multiplication is repeated addition. It's adding numbers. Just instead of adding 7 times, I can just multiply 7 times 7. Multiplication is used often in math, for instance, like geometry. That's one of the biggest areas that it's used. So here's a problem I have for you. Chet wants to plant a garden. He needs to have an area of 100 square feet. What are the possible options for garden sizes? What makes the most sense? All right, so as you're thinking about this for a second, there's a couple of different options for garden size, and I'm not using fractional sizes. It's all even numbers on these. So take a few seconds. You can pause the video and figure out what are the possible options for gardens that he could do using whole numbers that equal an area of 100 square feet. And then when you come up with the possible options, think about what makes the most sense. There's 2 different arguments you can make for this. All right, 2 different ones. So go ahead, pause the video now, and work this out. All right, so now you've hopefully got some answers. Here's what they've got. Here's what they are. Okay, so he wants to plant a garden. He needs to have an area of 100 square feet. What's the possible options? Well, there's a couple of different options. The first one is 1 foot by 100 feet gives you 100 square feet. And that's this top example that we have on the top. A long and skinny garden, 1 row. It's 1 foot wide and 100 feet long. That would be a garden. Now, does that make much sense? Not particularly. Why would you have a garden that's that long and skinny? It doesn't make any sense. Now, the next option he has, 2 feet by 50 feet gives you 100. So he could have a garden that's 2 feet wide and it goes for 50 feet long. Again, not super practical, all right? But you can see where that would be, all right? Now, the last two, these are the two that are pretty practical, and it kind of depends on what you're doing, all right? The 4 feet wide by 25 feet long, that could be a garden, gives you 100 square feet, or a garden that's 10 feet wide by 10 feet long. So it's a square that's 10 by 10 would also give you 100 square feet. So either one of those would work. And these are why I say both of these are sensible. If I was going to put a garden in my backyard, I don't have a big enough area to put a 10-foot by 10-foot. I might could squeeze that in, but it would use up a lot of the way my yard's shaped. It would work better in my yard to have a longer, skinnier garden. Now, when I say longer, we're not talking about the 50-foot or 100-foot, but a 25-foot garden that's 4 feet wide, that makes sense. That would be a good distance for me there. That's part of them. We could also put a 5-foot wide by 20 feet. That would be another option for you there. But what these are the factors of 100. This is telling you different things that you could multiply that equal 100. And these different examples that we're looking at here, this is just multiplication, but multiplication itself and having a calculator is not necessarily going to help you here. This is where you're going to have to think about what this actually means and what the numbers mean. You could put in 100 and divide it by 1 and divide it by 2 and divide it by 3 and divide it by 4 all the way up to 100 to come up with these answers. Or you could just kind of use your head and say, okay, what times what gives me 100? 1 times 100, 2 times 50, 4 times 25, 5 times 20, 10 times 10. Those are different things that multiply and give you that same answer there. And that's something that it's a multiplication skill. It's the operation skill, but it's also used in a way that you don't really think about as multiplication. And this takes us to our next slide here. Remember your times tables chart, and you had to do these in whatever grade it was, and the teacher said, okay, this is blank and I'm going to give you so much time to fill this in. And a lot of times this is what just drove people up the wall. People that hate math can think back to this. I've had so many students say, oh, in the 4th grade, we were going to have a pizza party if we learned our times tables, and I couldn't learn mine, so I didn't get any pizza. I hear those kind of things all the time. It's important for you to know these times tables, though. Everything that you do on this chart helps you in so many ways you don't even realize. We're actually going to use this chart multiple times over the next couple of lessons because this is where it all kind of comes back to, and you can see it on here. So when we see on the times table chart here, we see the numbers going across the top and going down. But let's think about this not just as a times table chart, it's an area chart. When we see this, it's showing us the area. This particular example would be, what is the area of this rectangle? The rectangle is 8 units across and is 5 units tall. So 8 times 5, or 5 times 8, equals 40. So the area of this shape is 40 square units, whatever those units might be. And if you look at it and count, there are 40 squares that make this shape up. So we can see and go, okay, there's 40 of them. We know what that is. That's an area problem, but it's also a multiplication problem. It's your same thing that we saw on the timetables charts. A lot of what we have to do on the test, this is geometry skill. It uses the basic operation. So it's so important that we know our times tables. If we don't, we're having to stop and think about it. Again, those are those time killers that you really need to work on to be able to be successful on the test. Now, a lot of times when we're doing problems, we don't even know where to begin. Okay, so we can do our addition, subtraction, multiplying, and dividing, okay, but we don't even know where to start. And it's important that you practice operations in the problem so you have time to problem solve later. If you start to see how problems work, like on the last one, that was an area problem, but it's just multiplication. it's amazing how many students come back to me and go, I never saw something on the test. And I tell them a lot of times you didn't realize that's what the problem was, and that's probably why you missed it or why you didn't pass. So I know what skills they're going to be testing, and knowing how to do these operations will help you to problem solve later. And that's why it's important to practice these skills, because you're going to start learning how to use these tools in different ways. There's an old joke for people that are mechanics or um, carpenters and things like that, is any tool can be a hammer. I have an iPhone right here. I could use it as a hammer. It wouldn't be a very effective hammer, but I could use it as a hammer. Not knowing how to use a tool correctly, though, and finding just the right tool for the right job makes the job go so much easier. And that's the same thing with math. If you have the tools in front of you, knowing how to use the tool correctly will work. A lot of times with my kids, I'm at home right now helping them do their schoolwork during this time of quarantine. I'll find my oldest son, he's in 4th grade. He will just be adding just tons of problems up on the side of the page. And I'm like, what are you doing there? Oh, I had to multiply something. And I'm like, why didn't you just multiply it? And he said, well, I just know how to do addition better. And I tell him, okay, that's fine. But I show him how to do the multiplication, because the multiplication would be quicker. And when you're taking a time test, every second counts. Now, for him to do that, he knew what he needed to do, and he used the tool that he was most comfortable with. That's okay, but we need to be more comfortable with those other skills. How do you become more comfortable with it? You practice it. You get in here and you work these problems. All right, so here's an example that we have. In 4 weeks of quarantine, we've used 65 rolls of toilet paper. How much toilet paper will we need if we're quarantined for 7 more weeks? All right, so if we see this, and actually, I meant to fix this, I will fix it on there. We're not going to do 7. We're going to actually do this as 9, because the later slide says 9 more weeks. So if we have this for 9 more weeks, there you can see that it's 9 now. Okay, so 4 weeks of quarantine, we use 65 rolls of toilet paper. How much toilet paper will we need if we're quarantined for 9 more weeks? Now, we're not looking at 4 weeks plus the 9 weeks for a total of 13 weeks. We're just saying, well, how much more toilet paper are we gonna need? And you need to make sure, and this is where it's important when you're watching and reading these problems, gotta look for what they're asking. And in this, the key word was how much toilet paper will we need if we're quarantined for 9 more weeks? Those more, that's where we know it's asking us how much are we going to need for that extra. Now, it may say how much toilet paper will we use altogether, or will we need altogether, but this is just asking specifically for that 9 more weeks. So I'm going to pause it and give you a couple seconds to think about how to work these problems. And actually, I'm not going to pause. You're going to have to pause. So pause it for a second and see if you can think about how you would solve this problem. All right, you've had time to think about it. So let's look at the next slide. In 4 weeks, we've used 68 rolls of toilet paper. How much toilet paper will we need if we're quarantined for 9 more weeks? How would you solve it? Okay, did you add? Did you subtract, multiply, divide? Did you have to do a couple of skills there? And this is where you can write in the comments what you thought about it and how you worked it out. Or if you just think it to yourself, that's okay. To do these problems, you actually have to do a couple of steps. It's a couple things all rolled into one. And that's how life is, and that's how the math test is. It's very rarely are you going to do one skill, you do one thing, you get one answer, and you're done. Very rarely will they do that. The test only has 35 or so questions on it. So if they only ask you one skill on one question, they know that, okay, we got to ask them more than that, because they're trying to do all of your high school equivalency on one math test. So they are going to give you multi-step problems. And it's very important that you're able to do those multi-step problems. So in this problem, you're actually going to have to do a couple of different things. So as we look at the next slide that kind of gives how you work it out, you see that we first had to divide and say, okay, if there's 68 rolls, over 4 weeks, how many rolls is that? Well, that's 17 rolls a week. So we're using 17 rolls of toilet paper in a single week. And if there's 17 rolls per week and we're for 9 weeks, well, that would be an answer of 153 rolls. So as you work that, if you got 153, good job. That's the correct answer there. But as we look at that and you see there's division and then multiplication, that you're having to kind of get one answer and take that answer to use something else. Is there an easier way that we might could have set that up? Whether you work it this way or the next way that I'm showing you, as long as you came up with the right answer, I don't care. You know, if you get the right answer and you're able to repeat it, that's what I want you to do. You can work it the way I show you. That's great. I think it's an efficient way that I'm going to be showing you, but I'm more worried about you being successful repeating what you do. If you can get every problem right by hopping on one foot and saying a blah, 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 do it if it works every time. But I want to show you ways that can help you to get it if you're not sure of a consistent way. So here's how you can set it up using the division and multiplication to set it up as a proportion or ratio problem. Now, when we did this, it's just a proportion problem or a ratio. What is the ratio of weeks of toilet paper to rolls of toilet paper? But on the test, they may call it a proportion problem or a ratio, but what skills are you doing? Division and multiplication. So it's important that we're familiar with this process. I've also heard from some GED training I've gone to that on the GED test especially, you can answer a majority of the test questions setting it up in some sort of proportional problem. Now, how to do that on all the problems, that gets a little bit tricky, but knowing this skill helps you to go through that. The reason I like this, we're going to be able to use this same thing with percent. We're going to be able to use this the same way in proportion and ratios and a few things like that. But the only skill that we're going to do on here is multiplying and dividing. Two of our basic operations that you have to be familiar with to be successful. So as you see here, we set it up. There's 68 rolls, and it's across from how many rolls that we're looking at. And I say there's 4 weeks, and that's how in 4 weeks we went through 68 rolls, and now we're looking at how many rolls would it be in 9 weeks. Now, before I even start, one of the things I try to do when I'm working a problem is think in my head and kind of guesstimate or project what an answer might be. I look at that and go, well, in 4 weeks it was 68 rolls. Well, 9 weeks, that's double 4 plus a week. So if I just double this, that's going to be 136. That's just if it's doubled. So I know my answer is going to be a little bit over 136. And if I think back to my answer a second ago, I know it's 17 more than that. So I know it's going to be in that 150 range. That's just from ballparking it. I like to take those, I call them guesstimates. It's where it's half guess, half estimate, just using what I see there. But I want to make sure I know how to do this. I want to see the skill, do the skill, and know that I have the answer. One of the things I want you to be able to do on the test is to know you have the answer correct. All right, so if we see this, what we're going to do is multiply and divide. How we do this, you remember, multiplication is an X, right? So when we see this, we are going to think of an X. And I'm drawing a little X there on your paper. X's go diagonally, right? So as you see an X, it's diagonally. And division, you have a line, and then you have a circle above it, and a circle below it. So when you see these signs, I want you to think, and you may go, why? Okay, I know what an X looks like. I know what a division sign looks like. Well, on the problem down there below, if you notice, I draw a line that connects diagonally the 68 rolls to the 9 weeks. I look at the ones that are diagonally across from each other, and that's why I remember to multiply first, because that's what I'm going to do with those. I'm going to multiply 68 times 9 because that's what's diagonal. The one that I circle, what am I going to do with the circle? Circle is division. The circle under the bar, that's the number that I'm going to divide by. So when I multiply 68 times 9, and I divide by 4, that's what gives me the answer. 68 times 9 divided by 4 gives me 153. So what we do when we set up that proportion, we're going to look and see, okay, I'm looking for the rows on top there. So I know I have 2 numbers that are diagonal from each other. And I'm going to divide by the number that's left out, the one that's on the circle that's either below or above the line. And it's going to set up this way every single time. That's why I like this. This is a repeatable way to do these problems. All right, so I'm going to give you another problem, ripped from the headlines, so to speak. All right, so same way we just did it. You can solve this with multiplication and division. But again, it's a proportional ratio problem, okay? So we see here that there are 2 infected persons, and for every 2 infected persons, they can infect 5 people. All right, so for every 2 infected persons, 5 people can be infected. If there are 367,507 infected persons, how many potential infected people could we have there? And this is, again, this problem shows why we are in quarantine. So when we see this, I'm going to give you a couple seconds to work this out. Remember what we talked about. You're going to use division and multiplication to do these problems. All right, remember multiplication is an X. Remember division is a circle and a circle. So think about how you'll set it up and work this. All right, now that you've had time to work it, let's see if you set it up in the correct way. What's diagonal from each other? 5 times 367,507. The one that's above it is the 2, and that's what gives us the answer there. There are 918,767 and a half people that can be infected by the 367,000. Now, this is exactly why we've been in quarantine for several weeks now, and it looks like we're going to be safer to stay at home for the next few weeks. But as we see this is why that they tell people to shelter. If 2 people or 1 person could infect so many people, then we look at this and go, wow, yeah, that's a bunch. So maybe we should do less to try to infect. And it's important for us to see how these proportions and ratios set up. Now, as we move forward with this, I want you to solve these 2 problems. I'm going to give you a couple seconds, and I'm just going to tell you in just a second to pause, but try to work these 2 out. All right, the first one, I'll read it just so you can hear it and make sure you're not getting confused. A blueprint scale says that 2 inches equals 24 feet. If the building is 16 inches long on the prints, how long is it in feet? All right, so it's 2 inches equals 24 feet. And then the building's 16 inches on the prints. So how long is it going to be in feet? For the second problem there, it says for 7 games we play, for every 7 games we play, our team loses 2. If this rate holds up, how many games will we win in a 35-game season? So take a couple seconds to work these out, and you can take as long as you need. Just hit pause, work them out, and see. I'll go ahead and tell you, though, that second one is a little bit tricky. Make sure you're paying attention to what it says. But go ahead and pause now. All right, now that you've paused and you've seen what they are and you've worked them out, hopefully you set them up this way. 2 inches equals 24 feet. 16 inches equals how many feet? Now, that's right. I was just making sure that I wrote it correctly there. 2 inches is 24 feet. 16 inches is how many feet? And then as you work that, you'll see the answer. And we're going to look at that on the next slide. On this one, on the bottom, we see that there's 2 losses equals 7 games. And if you notice here, this is where it was tricky. I don't have an equal sign here. And the reason why, the question said if we continue with this, how many games will we win? Not how many games will we lose. The initial ratio that was given there was 2 losses to 7 games. Well, if 2 losses in 7 games, that means there's 5 wins in 7 games. So then I could work the problem. If you did work it with this on the 2 losses, you would have gotten 10 for your final answer. You would have just had to subtract 10 from 35, and that would have given you the answer. But it's important that you see we're just doing the same thing, multiplying and dividing, but we've got to make sure we use the correct numbers to get to that answer. And this is what the answers are. It's 24 times 16 gives you divided by 2, and that gives you 192 feet, or 5, or in the next one, 5 wins times 35 games divided by 7 gives us 25 wins. So that's the answers to those 2 problems. And you can see how those were set up and how we came up with the correct answers that I've put highlighted in yellow there. So you can see what those answers should have been. All right, if you need more help on that, send me an email, put something in the comments, go to Khan Academy and get some extra practice. There's tons of proportion problems like that you can set up. These are all pretty simple whole numbers. You could have used a calculator if you needed to, but not too hard to work out there. Now, multiplication, we just talked about how it was used in some of those areas, but it's also used in squares. And if you think back to the multiplication chart we used and how it was connected to area, well, shapes have an area. And a square has the same length and width on all sides. Like when we were talking about the garden, we said 10 times 10 is 100. One side was 10, the other side was 10, so that makes a square that equals 100. Now, as we're looking at this, we can look at our multiplication chart, and this is just multiplying all the numbers times themselves. 1 times 1, 2 times 2, 3 times 3. Well, what these are what's called the squares. These are the perfect squares. Each one of these numbers, if these were all area problems drawn out, would equal a perfect square. It's important, especially on the GED test, to know your perfect squares through 15, and then it's good to know 20 as well. And if you look at 20 and 2, they end up being the same. You just add a couple zeros to it. We'll talk about that in a later lesson. So it's important, though, that you're able to look at these and know these. Now, writing them out this way, this is just taken straight from the times table chart. You could also write them like this. Just put the little 2 there as an exponent, because the exponent 2 says to multiply 1 times 1. You multiply 1 2 times, and that's what gives you 1. You multiply 2 2 times, that's what gives you 4. You multiply 3 2 times, that's what gives you 9, and so forth and so on. You can see all the way down. 6 squared is 36. We go to the next side. 7 times 7 is 49. You see what those squares are. As we go down all the way through, you see these perfect squares, and it's important that you know what these are. In our next class that we do, the next lesson I record and have on YouTube here, is going to use more about the squares. We're gonna start doing a lot more with that in the next lesson. So stay tuned and watch that one next. But as you see these squares, let's look at the other part where I mentioned before, that little number at the top is called an exponent, and that means to multiply the number times itself. In this case, it's 2 times. So if we have 3 squared, that means 3 times 3 equals 9. If we have 3 to the 3rd power, or 3 to the exponent of 3, what would that mean? Think about it for a second if you want to pause it so you can kind of think about what that might mean. Now, as you've done that and you've thought about it, 3 times 3 times 3, would that be the answer? And it is. 3 to the 3rd power, or 3 to the exponent of 3, is 27, because it's 3 times 3 times 3. If this exponent tells us to write it 2 times, well, this number must tell us to write it 3 times. And if I put a 5 up there, I'm going to write the number 5 times. And that's what I want you to practice on this next sheet. I give that one example that we just did. So use that knowledge that you have now to answer these 3 questions. You can pause it, take the time to come up with those answers, and we'll talk about it. All right, now that you've had time to do it, 2 to the 3rd power, that's going to be 2 times 2 times 2, which gives you 8 as your answer there. On this next one, 4 times 4 times 4, and you'll have to forgive me, I'm not very good at writing with a mouse. 4 times 4 is 16 times 4 is 16 times 4, which is 64. And then 10 times 10 times 10 equals 1,000, because that's 10 times 10 is 100 times 10 gives you 1,000. So as you can see there, exponents, we see those and we go, ooh, I don't know how to do my exponents, those are too big. All it is multiplication, where addition is repeated, or multiplication is repeated addition, exponents is repeated multiplication. So it's a simplified way of doing some of those basic things. All right, now that's where we're going to close today. If you have any questions, please either put it in, not the chat box here, but the comment section. You can email me at adult.education@rankingcountyschooldistrict.ms. Contact your teachers. We would love to be able to help you out if you had any questions on this. Please stay tuned. Come back to the YouTube page for other math lessons. There's one more lesson I will record, and then we already have another lesson on there. Every Tuesday at 1 o'clock, we do a math lesson. If you're interested in it, go to adult.education@rcsd.ms, send me an email, and I will give you an invitation to our next lessons that come up. Please stay safe. If you have any questions, send them to us, and thank you for participating. Have a great day.